just want to thank you so much for coming out tonight and being here for this forum that we're co-hosting with the League of Women Voters. I'm really excited to share with you this really expert panel that we have put together. I think you're going to really enjoy some of the things that I have to say, and this is a really timely topic that I get questions on almost every day. After we realized how much people are thinking about the election, even though the general election is a year away, this was really something that we needed to discuss, and we needed to provide the space to really have this conversation and get your questions answered. So we have some election experts here, as well as some advocates, to talk about how Illinois is preparing for next year's elections, especially given some of the topics in the news right now. Hello. So our moderator for the discussion tonight is the Honorable Susan Garrett. She's our board chair. Many of you know and love her. Hello. Susan has represented many communities in this area at both the Illinois House and Senate before bringing her talents to ICPR. And she's been always passionate about election issues and free and fair elections, so I really want to take the time to thank her for moderating the discussion tonight. And at the end of our event, the panelists will be available for a Q&A. So we're going to do about a half an hour of Q&A. So be thinking of your questions as we go, so you're prepared to shoot your hand up in the air right away. And I will call on as many of you as I possibly can. So we want to thank the League of Women Voters and our board members, if you are here tonight, or any League members that are here tonight. And we will be, specifically, I'll call Mark Levy and Stephanie Victor here from the ICPR board. So we will be live streaming the discussion today on our Facebook page at ICPR, and we'll be tweeting photos and some quotes from the event. So you can, if you're tweeting tonight, you can tweet us at ILCampaign with the hashtag ILElections18. You'll also find evaluation cards in your program, so if you could fill those out if you have time and return those to our check-in table, that's really helpful for us for our future events. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our moderator, Susan Garrett, to come forward and begin the discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. It is great to see so many friends. I always love coming back to my old district just to say hi to everybody and see what your feelings are and what's going on. We want to really thank the League of We want to thank the League of Women Voters for partnering with us on this important forum. Together, our two organizations are making an in-depth review of elections in Illinois. We will present a best practices analysis in 2018, whereby we will address any weaknesses in the program along with solutions. Tonight's forum, addressing accountability and integrity in the 2018 elections, is the second in a series of town hall events we are having to hear from our experts and receive feedback from our audience, people just like you. Your feedback will be important as we move forward on this project. We are also pleased to have such a great panel of experts on Illinois elections to discuss the administration and the security of our electoral process, which is critical to the integrity of voting. We are going to cover poll worker training, voting machines, early voting, hacking, and same-day voter registration. We will also discuss how election officials assess their performance and outcome of each election. Our goal is to ensure that voters have complete confidence of our electoral process in Illinois. And where there may be deficiencies, we will look to correct those. We will provide Q&A, as Sarah said, at the end to ensure we address any questions you may have. So let's begin. There's seats in the front if you want to come up a little bit. I'm sorry. We never imagined everybody would come that said they were there. Thank you for being here, nonetheless. Okay. What we will do is have each panelist introduce themselves and give some brief remarks. For those of you who have programs, if you want to just check their bio, that's in there as well. So why don't we start with Mary Shasma, who's president of the Illinois League of Women Voters.
Thank you, Susan. My name is Mary Shasma. I'm the executive director of the League of Women Voters.
You have to put it right up to your microphone. Yeah. There.
I have to use my microphone. As I said, I'm Mary Shasma. I'm the executive director of the League of Women Voters in Illinois. And it's always my pleasure to be able to participate in these joint presentations because ICPR does such a great job of doing them. And working with him on this important topic of election administration is one that I'm really looking forward to. I also want to make a shout out to all the League of Women Voter members who are here tonight. Just put that by a show of hands. Let me see who's a League of. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I did this from January and October.
No World Series tonight, though.
No World Series. Oh, yeah. It's an exciting World Series. Excuse me. So for nearly 100 years, the League of Women Voters is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2020, and we're gearing up to have some great opportunities for people to participate and honor both our past and look forward to celebrating our future. But for nearly 100 years, the League, an essential component of the League of Women Voters' mission is to encourage strong support for an election system that increases voter participation, protects the rights of eligible citizens to vote, and is free of fraud and political manipulation, and protects the integrity of the system. And on one hand, we're very fortunate to live in a state like Illinois where some of the voter suppression issues are not as apparent, but that doesn't mean that we can't come up with some best practices for how we can run our elections efficiently and make sure that people have access to the ballot, that their ballots are counted. And so I'm really looking forward to a big conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Hi, I'm State Senator Terry Link, and I can even go past Susan Garrett. This was my district before hers. And I tell you, this building still has the same problem. I had to park 2 blocks away. So I love this place. The memories in here are great, and a lot of great faces I'm seeing in this room. And I'll even show my age, and I guarantee it's not in the bio. I was the original elections administrator for Lake County under late Grace Mary Stern. I designed a department which now today runs all the elections in Lake County. And I've got to tell you, one of the things that I've had the opportunity in the Illinois Senate is that under President Jones and now President Cullerton, we lost power, I think, I have to say I'm allowed to do all the election laws that are in the Illinois Senate. And and to tell you, I'm not a lawyer, so they clear that up. So, but I had a lot of lawyers come up to me through the years and ask me advice on election laws. So I feel pretty good. Maybe there'll be an honorary law degree after a period of time. But I think we have done it, as was mentioned in the Senate and the House. A lot of these types of laws have been addressed, and a lot of things that we're looking at to make sure that we have safe elections throughout the whole state. But I have to warn everybody of one thing. All the legislation we do, all the bills that we pass and that still will not stop certain people from trying to violate the law. They never check the law books before they break the law. So, I mean, we're trying to do this, but I think the clerk who is modernizing the office even more has shown that we're trying every which way to make sure that every vote in this county and state is counted in a proper manner. And I will also look forward to questions too.
Thank you, Senator. I got here early and got a parking place right in front of the building.
There's something to be said about getting there early. Touche.
In my, I think in the bio in the program, it notes that I am a lawyer, and in fact I served in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office for 20 years before being elected. And part of that time, my tenure in the State's Attorney's Office, is in the Civil Division. One of my major responsibilities was to represent the county clerk's office. So I've had 15 years to become familiar with the election code. And that, I think, combined with some extremely talented staff and committed staff in the office, and in fact 3 of them are here tonight, Deborah Nieto, the Chief Deputy Clerk, Marianne Potter, the Director of Elections, and Todd Gobain, the Director of Voter Registration and Services. And I think the combination of committed, talented staff with knowledge of the law and a very knowledgeable staff that deals with technology in our office, I believe we are able to really prioritize our ability to implement and follow the laws and apply them consistently across the county to everyone. And that is what drives our activities. I think Lake County also has another combination of characteristics that enhance security and integrity, and that is number one, Lake County is the third largest county in the state with a population of a little more than 700,000. We have 435,000 registered voters right now. So we are a large county, and we do have, and because of that, we have resources, financial resources. But we're also not so large that we can't manage the county. We do everything internally, from printing our own ballot to packaging them to programming it. We train all of the election judges ourselves. Many counties around the state outsource some of these activities. We do everything internally. And so we're able to, the staff is able to manage it and do it consistently. And I think that enhances our ability to apply the law consistently and make sure that everyone who is eligible has the opportunity to vote. And I look forward to getting into some very specifics about some of these topics as we go through the evening and answer questions.
Is this working? Yes. I did. Try it. Is it? There we go. All right. My name is Brent Davis, and I work for the Illinois State Board of Elections. I'm the Director of Election Operations. And what we work with specifically in my division, so this is my area of expertise, I guess, everything from candidate filing, so we organize all aspects of when candidates file their nomination petitions, handling objections against those records, and then working in conjunction with our legal department. We handle training for election judges throughout the state, so our staff members do go basically from one end of the state to the other and assist jurisdictions that don't have the resources to do the training. We provide training options for them, and roughly half the state, as far as the number of counties, do take advantage of that, so it's a large presence that we have in the counties. We do all the publications for the agency, so if any of you happen to peruse our website, we put together the candidates guide, the election and campaign finance calendar, all of the brochures, all of those sorts of things. And also, just as kind of a side note to explain my position here is I am here as a representative of the board. Our board is an 8-member board. We have 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, so it's a bipartisan board. So if there's anything that is a question that's kind of political, I'm going to opt out of that, just because I'm sure there's going to be different opinions on our board, and I don't want to pretend to represent all of them. So I will be happy to answer any questions, related to procedure or election law to the extent that I can, and I look forward to participating in this discussion.
Hello, my name is Colin Williams. I'm the Policy Director for the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform. So that means that I help Susan and Sarah Bruni, our Executive Director, manage ICPR's research on a daily basis, and I also help develop policy for ICPR. So that involves doing research and working with elected officials, administrators like Brent and Carla as well, who's both an administrator and elected official, and our partners, including the League of Women Voters, to make sure that best practices in elections are implemented around the state in a way that meets each community's needs. And so that requires in-depth research and talking to officials and representatives from those communities, because the needs of Cook County and Chicago are not the same as in Lake County, and they're certainly not the same as a downstate county. And so I'm looking forward to having a chance to converse and discuss these issues with our distinguished panelists, and hopefully make some progress in seeing what issues are important to you, and what solutions and outcomes that we can be working toward in the future.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody. That was well done. Some of the questions that we are going to be asking you are they're divided in 3 categories. The first category includes topics in the news. So I'm going to start with that, because these are issues that you may have been reading about, may have heard about from your friends. So the first question is, and anybody can answer, we'll just have to make sure we move this along, but what do you see as the highest challenge in ensuring secure, fair, and open elections in Illinois or in your county? Carla, you can start. You can talk about Lake County, just to make sure that there's a confidence level where people feel like their vote really is going to count. There's no problems.
Well, I think what I would like to address through that are a couple of misconceptions that the public has about some of the voting, not only in Lake County, but in Illinois, although I come across it in almost every venue where I am asked to speak or participate. One is that there's an assumption that we vote on the internet and it's very easy to hack into the voting results. And that is simply not true. I'm not sure there's any jurisdiction in the United States that actually votes on the internet. The other tied to that is the misconception that our voter registration database and voter history is tied to the actual tabulation of votes and the election results. That is also not true. Those are completely separate systems, and they are not merged. So again, there's a reduction of or an effort to enhance security that way. 2 other really quick misconceptions that I want to address are one, also again, everywhere I go to talk, people, and we particularly encourage, for example, people to vote early or vote by mail. Those are 2 avenues of voting that have really increased opportunities for many people to ensure that they are able to vote and make their ballot count. And people say to me, well, I don't want to do that because I know you don't count the early votes and you don't count the vote by mail ballots unless you need them. Nothing could be further from the truth. We count every early vote. In fact, those votes are actually cast when you put them in the tabulator, when you go to vote early. The vote by mail ballots, when those arrive in our office, we have election judges in our office for months ahead of the election, and we treat those ballots just as if you were in the polling place. We check them for voter registration, we compare signatures. If a ballot is if the ballot's going to be rejected by the election judges, we contact the voter. We're required to contact them within 48 hours. They have an opportunity to come in and defend their ballot. The area that may create apprehension about it is that those votes are uploaded on election night last. And the reason that happens is the statute requires us to wait until the polls close on election night to actually tabulate the early votes and the vote by mail ballots. by that time we've already begun transmitting the election day results, so we have to wait until those are done and then we upload the other ones last. So those are a couple of misconceptions that I think people assume that affect the integrity of the election. They're simply not true. I think that the November election, which is the last big one that I can give you statistics for, and another one are the provisional ballots. I think of provisional ballots in November 2016 election, we had about 1,300 provisional ballots. About 70% of those were cast. The reason why some of them were not cast in Lake County, about 98 of them were from different jurisdictions. For example, people from Cook County who insisted on voting in Lake County, so we gave them a provisional ballot. We then sent those to Cook County. We also had a number of people who we had already received their vote by mail ballot, so their provisional ballot was not counted. And then we had another category of people who we had contacted them because, for example, if you go into the polling place and you're in a special circumstance and you were required to produce ID and you didn't have it, you were given a provisional ballot, you have 7 days to come into our office and provide the identification, and then we have 14 days to process those. Many people, even though they were given the opportunity to bring in identifications, simply did not. Our vote by mail ballots, 96% of those are cast. The ones that are not cast, typically in the November 2016 election, some of them were simply arrived too late in our office. All those people could still vote on election day. Some of them, again, we notified them that they were going to be rejected, perhaps because of a signature problem, and then they chose not to contact us to defend their ballot. And I think I'm talking too long.
Yeah.
But those are
We're happy you're talking, but we got to move on. Thank you for saying that. So does anybody want to add to what Carla Wyckoff has been talking about regarding the Lake County election process?
I just want to add one thing. I think the thing that we have to remember, there's no such thing as election day anymore. It's election month. It's a 30-day process now, and Carla is well aware of that, and you know, we have sat down many times to talk about different types of ways that we could do it. And I think people have to realize, you know, some people say, well, I'm going to vote early, and then all of a sudden something happens on the news and they see something, they say, well, I'm going to change my vote. Well, you can't. You only get one shot at it. So, you know, you can't change that vote. But I think the thing is, in the mindset, and Carla could answer this better than I think we're at, what, 35% or 40% of early people voting early now?
Well, at the November general election, 2016, 41% of the ballots cast in Lake County were cast either early or by mail.
Can we talk a little bit about early voting? Because I hear from people, I live in Lake Forest, and early voting is always at City Hall. But it's not for every community to have a place within their community for early voting. And so people are sometimes confused. Where do they go? What are the dates? It's, again, maybe I'm a little bit off on this, but I think that there's not total consistency. There's a period, but some communities or jurisdictions decide to do it for 8 days or 10 days or whatever it is. So let's clarify that and try to understand if people have advance information on where to go to early vote and when.
Well, we'll have to talk to the sponsor of the bill. Oh, wait, that was me. When we did early voting, there was a lot of apprehension about early voting, a lot of it. And matter of fact, after the first cycle of early voting, Susan's question was very apropos because there was a lot of, and I'll say it myself, felt a lot of discrimination in certain communities. So what we did is, instead of giving the leeway, we changed the law to say if a certain population, they had to have a early voting site. Now, Carla and I have sat down, and this was preceding Carla, so I won't pick on her, we have sat down as trying to figure out the most useful way of switching this possibly to get a bigger vote, because some of the problems we had, Susan, and I'll tell you, I now live in Vernon Hills. I went to vote, early voting, and the line was probably from here 2 blocks away. But I was told, why don't you go over to North Chicago? I went over to North Chicago site, and there was only about a half a dozen people ahead of me. So it was different sites, different ways of seeing this, and the peak periods and the low periods were going on in some of these places. So we've sat down and we're talking about possibly putting in some permanent locations that would answer your question and answer everybody to where I think the voters would have more ability. But as far as the time period, that's set by statute. They have to be open these certain periods of time.
But can, for instance, if I vote in Lake Forest, I know I can go to Waukegan and early vote, but can I go to North Chicago and early vote? If I can go anywhere I want in Lake County to early vote.
Yes, early voting now, all of the voting sites are what we call universal. The March election, Lake County will have 15 early voting sites spread geographically around the county. Of those, as Terry mentioned, there are what we call mandated sites, and those are, we are mandated to have at least one early voting site in each one of the largest municipalities, and that is Gurnee, North Chicago, and Waukegan. Waukegan, because of its population, we have 2 mandated sites. But spread throughout the county, you can go, any voter can go to any site. We try to publish that information as much as we can. It's all over our website. We have a new application now on our website when you get close to election time, where you can key in your address and it will show you where is your most convenient polling place for early voting. And in fact, I do think there's some confusion with voters that then on election day they have to go to their own neighborhood polling place. We would like to see vote centers eventually, so that essentially what you have is 16 days of voting and no distinction between election day and early voting. But we are consistent as possible. Those mandated early voting sites have extended hours in the evenings, also on Saturdays and Sundays. So we think that it's pretty convenient to vote during the early voting period.
If people know about these sites. Mary, go ahead.
Well, you know, early voting is, I think, one of the best things that's come along in Illinois in a long time in terms of making it easy for people to vote. I represent a statewide organization, and because we have a decentralized form of election administration in Illinois, every jurisdiction gets to pick the date and time of the hours. So it makes it really hard to say early voting is this period when a local jurisdiction is a different time period.
That's not true.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
The
is.
statute dictates that.
No, but they don't have to have it open the entire time.
Yeah, they do.
Well, let me ask Brent.
9 to 5, or it's either, sorry. So early voting, it starts at 40 days before the election, and between 40 days and 15 days, the permanent sites don't exist. So there is a lot of variation in some jurisdictions will open up additional sites, and that's at their discretion. A lot of jurisdictions, a lot of the smaller ones will have early voting available at the county clerk's office or the Board of Election Commissioners office. At the 15-day mark is when the permanent polling places, as they're called, have to be opened up. And those do have mandated hours that are 8:30 to 5 or 9 to 5, and then starting at 8 days before the election, it turns in they have to be open until 7 o'clock, I believe, during the week, and then they have to be open for a period of 14 or 16 hours on the weekends. And so it is a little bit confusing when I just tell it to you all in those parameters.
I think it is confusing.
It is.
I get how it's in the statute and everybody understands it who's in the business to understand it. But for many people who don't think to even go online they are confused, and that's something I think we really need to address. So that 40-day period is critical, that there's some continuity or consistency or way of getting that message across as to the time.
One of the biggest problems we face with this Susan, is the fact is we're blessed in the size of the county we have, the access to voting that we have. You get these rural areas in southern and central Illinois where you don't have the community that is 25,000 or larger. In fact, you got some counties that are not even 25,000. So their mandate of having a polling place is the courthouse, just like any. So your people are coming from a long distance. So it's hard to set a concrete, solid way of doing it for every county. So that's why when we originally wrote the bill, we gave leeway so that the smaller counties could be adaptable to what they would be more fit than what we are. We're still tweaking it. It's like Carla said, it's been a huge success in the state, but there can be tweaks in it, but it's very hard when you get the population variations.
No, I understand. I guess I want to emphasize that there is some inconsistency to this, and we would like to address it at some point.
Although in Lake County, because of that, even though we don't have to because they're not all mandated sites, we do have our sites primarily consistent in, for example, the non-mandated sites do not have to be open the first Saturday, but we have voting the first Saturday just to be consistent with all the others. So we try to make it as consistent as we can because we understand voters get confused. That's why eventually we want to go to vote centers, Senator Lee.
Vote centers are on. Mary, did you have anything to add to that? Anybody else? Brent, Colin? Okay. Should we talk about hacking? I got more questions from people who want to understand what the heck is going on with hacking at the State Board of Elections, or is that just something we're reading about and said fake news? So clarify.
Okay, it's not fake news, and I won't pretend that it is. So there's a lot of things that are in the news, and so I want to make sure that we all understand the one specific thing that I'm talking about at this moment, because if we talk about the hack, or if we talk about the Election Integrity Commission of the Trump administration, or if we're talking about the cross-check system, those are three completely different things, and they're all hot topics in the news. So I want to make sure that if we're talking about the hack, that is...
Can we talk about the Russians?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's settle on the Russians first.
All right.
See where it goes.
So essentially what happened is there was a page in our online voter registration application, and as you know, you go from page to page entering information. One of the fields had an incomplete security setup, for lack of a technical term on my part, and it was exploited by a hacker, and they were able to view voter registration records, and we can't tell exactly if they copied them or if they did not copy them. We can't tell that. They were able to look at them. We don't know what they did with them. That security lapse on our website was fixed when it was discovered, and we have worked with various agencies, Department of Innovation and Technology for the state, Department of Homeland Security, all of these other groups that have cybersecurity experts to make sure that we don't have any other lapses in our website or that could be exploited. So it happened, it was fixed. I mean, and that's where we're at. I don't know exactly if you have specific questions that...
Well, how did you know they were Russians? That was one of the questions.
That is something that we did not learn internally. It was released from Department of Homeland Security. So they were the ones that were doing the cybersecurity investigation, so to speak.
And could they went in there for a reason. Is there anything that they could have taken out that would have compromised our voting system?
No.
Illinois?
No, and this comes back to Carla's comments earlier about the misconceptions. One of the biggest misconceptions is that, you know, this voter registration intrusion, which I'm not, you know, trying to say it's not a big deal, because it is a big deal for a lot of reasons, but it's completely unrelated to your voting on election day or voting through the mail or early voting and the tabulation of those ballots, because it is a completely separate system. It is, it cannot be, the two things are completely separate. So they're completely unrelated. They can't be manipulated without actually having like physical contact with them, because they're not online, as Carla mentioned. We have paper ballots, so there's always a paper trail. Even the electronic voting machines that you use produce a paper trail of what ballots were cast. So there's several levels of security built in there. And as far as you know, that security hack affecting the elections, one of the biggest things that they could have done would be to, you know, if they had removed voter registration records, but they did not remove anything. Even if they had, you know, there are still several safeguards in place for that. Not only do we have backups of the data, but if the voter was to show up in the polling place or wherever, we have same-day voter registration, we have provisional voting, we have voter affidavits to correct these types of things.
So why do you think they wanted to do it? I'm just curious. I know it sounds like a crazy
I mean,
question,
as far as the personal opinion, I think it was to sow discord in or you know, create confusion, create a lot of misconceptions, a lot of concerns. Again, those concerns are well placed, but I think it was to undermine the integrity of the election process and sow a lot of uncertainty about it.
Yeah, I would add, I think in Illinois, because our voting systems are so decentralized, it is difficult to hack into Illinois system. And so, and because, for example, in Lake County, we use the optical scan system, which again, if you, any reports that you read, the optical scan system is the least vulnerable of our tabulating and voting systems. So I think the frustration with these people who are trying to hack, they can't hack into our actual tabulation. So then they go after the next biggest thing, which is the statewide voter registration database. And even that was not successful. So then their next strategy is just to erode the public's confidence and raise these kinds of issues. I think in Illinois we're basically in pretty good shape. That does not mean that we shouldn't be vigilant.
Thank you. Colin, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight what both Carla and Brent have said already, is that when it comes to hacking in elections, there's kind of two components to it. There's the technical data security of it, and then there's also what we've seen in the news a lot over the past month or so, and that's the social hacking of it. It's sowing doubts into the mind of voters about whether or not these issues are actually critical in taking down elections, or if they are, or if there's resiliency built into the system of registering and going to the ballot box and casting your ballot. And I think the main loss and the main effect of the hacking that we saw in 2016 isn't some critical compromise of the integrity of the results. It's the fact that now there's people across the country who aren't sure whether or not our elections are safe and secure, and that's why it's important for everyone in this audience to be coming and asking the questions and hearing the answers and reaching out to voter advocacy groups, reaching out to your elected officials, because ultimately the easiest way for some nefarious outsider, I feel like, is to cause harm to the process isn't going to be breaking into some technical aspect of the elections, although there are vulnerabilities that we and all the administrators and elected officials on this panel want to take care of, but it's making people feel like they don't want to go out to vote because they don't think it'll end up counting. And that just goes back to the misconceptions we've been talking about throughout the night.
Thank you.
Just real quick, in relation to this, we passed 2 pieces of legislation. One that requires the state agencies to report security breaches that affect more than 250 Illinois citizens to the Department of Information and Technology. And this was enacted into law, and also requires all state employees to undergo an annual cyber security training, and that was acted law. So we took a positive step forward with it.
I think that's good, and I think that people like to hear this. You know, when we hear that our voting system has been hacked, and then there's silence, you know, for a while, nobody knows exactly how to respond. That becomes problematic to Colin's point, you know, is my vote safe and secure? So I think from that lesson, you know, I totally feel confident that the system is strong, but there might be a better way of communicating that across the state to the voters so we all hear what you've said tonight, because I think it really has made a big difference. And I think, Carla, you talked about the decentralization of the, or somebody did, about, you know, how Illinois is so decentralized when it comes to voting apparatus. And that gets us to the voting machines. So I voted on so many different machines, I'm not even sure. It's just amazing how many there are. And some are very old, and some, you know, maybe can be, I don't think this would ever happen, but I've heard there are instances where it's hard to track each vote. I may be wrong on this, I'm just relaying what I'm hearing. So the first question is there any, and maybe this is for Terry, is there any way in which we can prevent this decentralization of the voting apparatus? Is there a way to get one machine for every voting jurisdiction? Is this pie in the sky? Is this something that other states do? But it really seems to be like very different depending on what jurisdiction can afford what kind of machine.
The senator has kicked it to me to start.
That's because you can find parking places.
Although we are decentralized, the tabulating equipment that we use in every jurisdiction in Lake County has to be certified by the State Board of Elections. And so there is a limited number of vendors that we can even use. So even though we have different systems, it's really within a limited number of varieties. Fortunately, in Lake County, we have actually all new equipment. And that was partly based on the fact that there were so many changes in the legislation that went into effect in 2016. The election day registration, the universal voting sites, and also a couple of other things. We had to go out and purchase an entirely new system. We now have electronic poll books. We bought all new tabulators because we bought them in 2000 and they were starting to get old. And we bought the express vote machines. Those are to handle the universal early voting sites. We had to have a machine that would produce a ballot on demand because, for example, in the consolidated election, we have 1,200 different ballot styles in Lake County. And if we didn't have those express vote machines, we would have to have a supply of all 1,200 of those at every single polling place. So even though it looks like we have a lot of different things, it really is a lot the same. We have, for all of our equipment, we have a paper ballot where the voter actually selects the choice, and the paper ballot is then put in the tabulator and cast.
Okay, and then so Brent, maybe this goes to you. What about other jurisdictions? Is there uniformity or?
Yeah, I think Carla mentioned this, that in the state, it has to be a system that is approved by the State Board of Elections. So it's not like you can just, pick up, Google it and order it off the internet, and that's what you're going to use. It has to go through a certification process in which we test it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and literally run hundreds of thousands of ballots through that to test the accuracy of it. In addition to those systems being approved in the state, which I believe there are 5 systems approved in the state right now, so 5 different systems you could potentially be using. In addition to those systems being approved initially, they have to be tested routinely. So before each election, you have to run testing on it. We do random audits throughout the state where we go and do testing on it to make sure that everything is counting properly. And then after the election, we do the retab. Jurisdictions are all required to complete 5% of the precincts in which they run those ballots back through the same machines. Also run their test decks through to make sure that on their test deck of ballots that they had initially, that those come out the same, and that they get the same results from those election day ballots.
So I guess what I'm concerned
Yes.
about is that Lake County has, I'm just hearing this, and this is great, brand new machines that are top of the line. What happens in Sangamon County? Do they have those same kinds of machines, or is it based on what kind of money they have to spend, or is it not even relevant?
It is based on what kind of money they have, because if you look at the situation now where, a lot of the machines are 10, 12 older and they were paid for with federal funds. When HAVA was passed, they provided millions of dollars to the state to pay for this equipment. What happens when this equipment is old and decrepit and not working? You know as well as I do, if you have a laptop computer that's 12 years old, it doesn't work anymore. So what happens when your voting equipment is 12 years old? Yes, we're still testing it, we're still piecing them together to keep them working, but we no longer have millions of dollars from the federal government, and I don't know if you're aware, but the state of Illinois doesn't have that money either. So
that was a topic that I haven't covered yet.
Yes, okay.
I don't want to.
So we're in a situation where jurisdictions that previously paid for with federal funds, everything's great. For 10 years, we got equipment. Now you're looking at counties that they can barely pay their office staff, and they don't have thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for this equipment.
Right, and I think that's what I'm trying to draw out. How do you feel about that? How do the panelists feel about that? That some counties are deserving of the best performing, top of the line voting machines, and other counties have the 10 to 12-year-old machine that is pretty much taped together, and they test, and I'm sure there's probably no inaccuracies. But on the other hand, it feels different, doesn't it? That some are privileged enough to have something that nobody worries about, but others, don't have.
But one of the things that they did is when the Voters' Rights Act went with the federal government, and correct me if I'm wrong, the federal government allocated so much money to all the states to bring all this into line. Obviously, if the federal government would bring that back into all these counties, they could modernize it too. Obviously, each state can't afford it. Other states are in worse shape than Illinois. It's hard to believe, but it is that, you can't afford it on a state-by-state basis, let alone a county-by-county. So if the federal government was to bring that in, to bring this up to date, then you could start bringing those machines up to date even further for the smaller counties. So I think, we're always blessed here in Lake County because we're one of the richest counties, plus one of the most forward counties in a lot of things that we do up here. So, you go down to Effingham or areas like that, they're scratching for every dollar they can get a hold of. So I think it's incumbent on the federal government to understand this again so we don't face this, what we did prior to the hanging chads and stuff like that, that we go back to proper machines.
Any more comments on the inequity of voting machines? Something that I think we will look at as we develop best practices. I think it's worth reviewing. Okay, let me just move along here. So when you talk about the budget that each county has, for purchasing voting machines, what about training? I know that in Cook County they have millions of dollars set aside for training and other things. I don't know the budgets of every county when it comes to ensuring that poll workers are trained. And Carla, when you're talking about these new machines, making sure that everybody's in tip-top shape and they know what's going on. That's expensive. That's another expense. How is that handled? Maybe Brent, you could talk about that at the state level, and then we'll come back to Lake County.
Okay. So as far as the training goes, there's a lot of challenges that are associated with training, not just paying for it, but the, demographics of our election judges, especially in a lot of smaller jurisdictions, are not interested in learning new technology. They're not interested in attending a training that's 4 hours long because it's boring, it's not fun. And I get it, I've given these presentations, I've given the training sessions. It's not fun. And it's very difficult to find election judges who are interested in the process, who are willing to put forth that extra effort, because we're asking a lot of our election judges more and more and more every year, whether it be asking them to do same-day registrations or asking them to learn new equipment, learning these new tabulation systems, learn how to use poll books, learn how to know all the laws. And these are people that are working 2 days a year, and we're asking them to learn a lot for their work schedule of 2 days a year. So it's a very challenging aspect of it. And money is an issue, but I think that the overall picture is having individuals that are willing to work that 14, 15-hour day, know all the aspects of their job that day, and most of them aren't getting paid hardly anything for their work that day.
How much do they get paid, or does that vary as well?
It varies.
It varies. There's a minimum in the statute. That's one area that I would like to see a little bit of additional money from the state to reimburse election judges. In Lake County, we do all the training ourselves. Our staff trains all of the election judges. That's one of the ways we do save some money. We actually do more training than what is required by the statute. By statute, they're commissioned every other year and they only have to be trained once. We require our election judges to go through training before every election to at least do a refresher course. And you're right, with all the new equipment, we did have to do a lot of training. But for the first time, we now require our election judges to take tests. They have to pass the assessment test at the end of the training, or they will not be scheduled to work. We allow them to take the class again. We have some judges who want to do it so badly that they have taken the class 3 times and then ultimately pass. We also recruit, there's a provision in the statute that allows us to use juniors and seniors in high school who are not actually 18 and not eligible to be election judges based on other parts of the statute, but we heavily recruit students. At the November 2016 election, we had 285 juniors and seniors in high school, and they are very facile on the computer. They have a lot of energy. They are an excellent addition to our election judge cadre. I think one of the things that I would love to see, and I'm going to talk to the senator about this later on. Now that we have early voting, and these early voting sites go for 15 days, and then you have election day, I'm not sure that we need to have our polls open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. on election day. They're already open till 7 p.m. the week before, the early voting sites the week before election. And they're open Saturday and Sunday all day before election. So one possibility is maybe we could reduce the time that the polls are open on election day, which would make it a little bit easier for some of our judges.
Okay, that's great. Let me just get back to the training a little bit and the cost of training and making sure that poll workers are trained. So, Brent, to you, what we do in Lake County, you heard Carla say that, is that pretty standard across the state in making sure that there are tests and staff is able to train poll workers, or is it a scattershot type approach, or is there a manual that you give to, you know, I have no idea.
So the state board does prepare a standard manual for election judges, and the counties do have the option to tailor it, customize it to their own counties, and Lake County does that. A lot of the bigger jurisdictions will do a more in-depth manual to also provide information on the, you know, the equipment setup, takedowns, specific information for how to handle things in Lake County or wherever. But what you'll see is that a lot of jurisdictions, again, don't have the resources that Lake County has. If you go to Alexander County, they have, I mean, we will go and we will provide the training for their election judges, but they're lucky to even find any election judges that are willing to serve, that are, if they don't get the help from the party chairman to help recruit them, which a lot of counties don't get that help, it's very difficult to find the number of election judges that that they need. And so you'll have a lot of different variations as far as the, you know, what you're working with in every county. The counties can do the training themselves, or again, the state board does offer training programs for those judges. So we send people out in the field, and again, we did provide that those training sessions for, I believe it was 52 jurisdictions in the last general election that we had. So there are a lot of jurisdictions that do take advantage of that. But again, with that being said, there are still going to be variations of the level of training that happens from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Great. Anybody want to add to that? I thought we'd move on to same-day registration. Terry, what do you think about that?
Love it. Obviously, I think it is. I think we have tried to do something in the state of Illinois, and honestly, it frustrates the living daylights out of me when you see municipal elections having a 10% turnout, when you see township elections at the same amount, whatever. Yeah, we in Lake County on the big elections for president or something, we have 70-some%. We have made it so easy, there is no excuse for not having 100% voting. I'm serious about this. And I've always said, if I lose the election with 100% turnout, God bless it, at least I know all the people voted. But when you lose the election with 10% of the people showing up, that's frustrating. The point is same-day registration has answered it to where I know Carla in her short period of time as clerk, or anybody that's ever served as a judge or a clerk, well, I meant to register, but what do you mean it closed 3 days before the election? You know, why can't I vote? On and on, there was always an excuse. Now with same-day registration, there absolutely is no excuse for somebody not to vote.
So let's talk about the logistics of it.
I think Carla's going to disagree with
Well,
me.
Colin had his, I'm going to go to Colin because he has his hand on his microphone. I'm guessing that's because you want to talk.
Yes.
Okay.
So just to add to the senator's comments on same-day registration, I think one of the other huge benefits of same-day registration, just going back to the security of elections, is having same-day registration adds to the resiliency of polls. I think Brent brought it up earlier, where if we were to, by some disaster, either malicious or accidental, lose every single voter registration and not be able to have poll books ready for election judges, I think same-day registration is a great final fail-safe there to add resiliency and confidence to elections. And like the senator said, it's a great way to remove an easy way to remove a barrier to having high turnout. I mean, there's a lot of factors that affect turnout, and a lot of them are out of election administrators' control. But I think that this is a great one to help people get out to vote.
So my question is, because I've heard from some people that easier said than done. You know, it's a great idea, but how, if, we're talking about training, we're talking about poll voting machines, how do the voting jurisdictions make sure that the registrars are trained, or however that's going to happen, and that they're confident that that person hasn't voted already in Cook County and is coming over to Lake County or someplace else? When we're talking about security of our elections, I know that was sort of an argument of why it took some time to pass this bill.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with the senator. We, in 2016 for the primary, which is the first time we had election day registration, we registered more than 4,000 people on election day. And for the general, we registered more than 5,000. When I look at the percentage turnout, and I compare it to 2012, which was a presidential election where we did not have election day registration, the turnout percentage-wise was almost identical. So I don't know if we are actually increasing the turnout as much as we are able to resolve issues of people who can still vote on election day even though they needed to update their registration or just register even to begin with. We have done a lot of training. Part of our training is to specially prepare, and we have geared up for election day registration in our polling places. We have judges that are especially trained to do it. The reason why we purchased our electronic poll books is so that we can have immediate voter history update. Within Lake County, we can tell if somebody has voted someplace else in the county.
In early vote, or no, it'd be for any, well.
For anything in Lake County are these electronic poll books, which have our entire voter registration database in them. If somebody has already voted, or they've tried to register someplace else in the county on election day and then they try to go to another polling place later in the afternoon, our system will have that information. What we can't do, Susan, is what you talked about. If they vote in Cook County and then come to Lake County and vote, we can't necessarily pick that up on election day. We do find that out later because we do compare those statistics. And in fact, we have at least 2 people that we have been able to determine voted in both Cook County and Lake County in the November 2016 election. And when we find out that information, we do turn those over to the state's attorney's office, and they do an investigation and proceed from there.
Thank you. And then Colin, I think you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to speak to your initial point about implementation, in speaking with administrators from outside of Lake County and Cook County and our area here, so more downstate people, resources are certainly critical to being able to implement these new laws well. And I'm sure our other panelists could speak to, especially the senator could speak to the legislative intent with election day registration. But because resources are so vital to doing election day registration right, that's why these smaller counties aren't required to have election day registration in all the polling places, because as administrators have told me, that's just a huge resource burden on them when they have trouble getting election judges in the first place, and then being able to pay their election judges, pay to recruit good election judges. and get the equipment that's necessary to do it right. That's definitely something that's hard, and it's I think everyone on the panel has said this at some point tonight, but more resources would help, whether it's from the federal government, whether it's from the state government. It would help, and individual jurisdictions just aren't capable necessarily by themselves, especially as you get to a lot of the downstate counties with smaller populations.
We also, anybody want to add to that? Go ahead, Mary. Yeah.
I think Illinois should be applauded and applauded loudly for some of the ways in which we've made access to the voting booth easier, more convenient. But at the end of the day, and we talk a lot about turnout, the impact that turnout has. At the end of the day, we need to incentivize voters to get out there for reasons other than early voting or same-day voting registration, but to really start looking at the candidates and having candidates that are willing to talk to the public and say, voting is important and these are the issues on which I stand. There are tangential issues associated with turnout, and I'm not going to get into some of those, but I think we have to take a long, hard look on what else incentivizes voters to get out and vote.
And to that point, have we seen an increase in voter turnout? This is probably nobody has this answer. In the last, let's say, 4 election cycles, do we know if election turnout, voter turnout is going up or down or staying the same?
Well, again, I can only address Lake County. Turnout as a percentage of registered voters has stayed pretty constant. For example, presidential elections typically generate about a 71 to 74% turnout. And that's been pretty standard really for the last 3 presidential elections. Consolidated elections vary somewhere between 9 to 15%, and that again is fairly static in the last few years. What has changed in Lake County, and I can't address the rest of the state, is that we have more registered voters now than we've ever had in the history of Lake County. So for the November 2016 election, again, the turnout was 71%, but we had more ballots cast because we had more registered voters. Lake County has about an 83% rate of registration among age-eligible voters in the county. So percentage-wise, it hasn't increased, but we just have more registered voters.
Fred, do you want to add anything to that regarding the state?
I didn't check registration numbers.
I mean turnout.
Well, as far as turnout, I honestly don't think that there is a huge fluctuation. I agree with Carla that it's reasonably consistent. I don't think that there are big variations in that turnout percentages. And obviously that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, especially in those local elections where in the consolidated election last year, we saw anything from a 5% turnout in counties to a 50% turnout. And it all depends on what their local races are. But if they're just going out and in a very rural community, all they're voting for is their township clerk or their trustee for their fire department, people don't get excited about it and they don't show up for it. And so it just depends on the issue that is on the ballot, or if there's a public question that everybody's concerned about. But jurisdiction to jurisdiction, yes, there is a big variation in those turnout numbers. But as far as the state, I don't see that there's a big fluctuation from a general election to the next general election or whatever.
Okay. Terry, you want to add to that?
You may have a little thing that you got to look at now with the instant registration when you go get your driver's license or your ID card. Because if you talk to a lot of people who are not registered, they say, I don't want to be an assistant because I'll get on jury duty or I'll have this problem. That's the reason they didn't register to vote. Now, those same people, when they get their driver's license or that, are going to find out they're registered to vote. And I got to say, former President Barack Obama can serve on jury duty. Any of us can. I mean, so, and he's only settling for the $17 a day that he's going to get. So. may only be one day.
Terry's always
Actually,
putting a
it's
plug
not-
in for his guy.
It's not based on your voter registration, it is,
Jury duty is based on driver's license.
I know, but that's what I say,
But something that probably should be clarified.
they always do.
All right, I'm going to open it up for questions now. I'm not sure exactly. So Sarah will come over to you. She's going to hold on to the microphone and take it away if you talk too long.
Hello. I've always been fascinated with elections. I'm kind of like Carla in my earlier years. I was a county clerk for 12 years. And do you know why we vote on Tuesday? We vote on Tuesday because it goes back to early rural America. And in a regular election, countywide election, national election, you had to go to the courthouse to vote. And they didn't want to interfere with Sundays or the weekends. And so Monday was the day to travel to the big county seat. And it was only men, by horseback most likely, and carriage or whatever.
We've come a long way.
And anyway, so the question, that's not a question, but the point is, it is so convenient now to vote. There's no obstacles anymore. I mean, we've come up with so many improvements. And I have to admit, I got to serve as an election judge in Lake County. And I have never, ever seen such a terrific group of instructors in Carla's office or staff. They do a fabulous job.
I did not pay him to say
All right, no more statements. We are only going to ask
I just
questions.
want to
Thank
add
you,
one
Mr.
thing.
Desmond.
If you want to go back in history, do you remember in Illinois that you could vote on school board elections were Saturday afternoons from noon to 6 at night?
Yeah, when every jurisdiction ran their own election.
Right.
Before consolidation.
Well, I'll put it in the form of a question, just like Jeopardy. Is there any possibility that you could allow judges to only serve a half a day? Because I know a lot of ladies about my age, recently retired, but the length of the day is what deters them. I did it once, and I can't last that long.
Right now, it's required by statute. I think the wording in the statute even says, once seated, judges may not adjourn. It would take a change in...
Is there a reason for that?
I can only presume that originally the legislature enacted that to ensure consistency and neighbors knowing neighbors in the polling place. I think if you had two shifts, a couple of things might happen and maybe they would balance out. We would have to recruit twice as many election judges. Right now in Lake County, it requires 1,700 election judges on election day. Now, we might be able to recruit more if they only had to do a half a day. The other problem
That's what
is...
she's saying. That's what she's saying.
Yeah, the other problem is cancellations. If we have two shifts, then we just have more cancellations.
You got more bodies that might do a double.
Yeah.
They might.
emergency.
They might.
We hear this a lot, that it's such a long stretch.
I would just like to see the election day shortened because I think now with early voting going for 15 days and
Terry's saying it's like...
yeah, I know I'm just talking to the wind, but
You'd have to shorten it to 4 hours.
All right, we'll keep moving on. But that's a really good point, Colin. We should note that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have two questions for Brent. The first one, I must have missed this, but we didn't discuss it tonight. And for the record, I'm interested in knowing what information was accessed, what voter information was accessed in the hat. That's a short answer is fine, but I'd like that addressed. And secondly, regarding the issue of election judges, or the shortage of them, do election judges have to reside in the district that they volunteer to work in?
They have to be registered voters in Lake County.
Or their respective county, yes.
I was just thinking it might be interesting if there were a volunteer pool of people who were able to be able to help serve in underserved counties.
Well, as far as the election judges
That's a good point.
crossing
That's right.
jurisdictions, I would suspect
Ignore
that,
that, Colin.
with a lot of them, with it starting at 5 or 5:30 in the morning when you have to show up, that traveling a more extended distance is probably not as feasible. I also, just to comment on the last question about splitting the shifts into two. I think that part of that comes back to a level of accountability for the judges that sign in the morning. You know, you sign off on all of those ballots that you're receiving, and at the end of the night, you sign off on all those affidavits and all those forms and your statement of ballots that show, you know, here's how many ballots came in, here's how many were voted, here's how many were spoiled, here's how many were
voted provisionally.
Well, let me ask you, do other states have the same kind of long day for poll workers, like you have to stay, whatever it is, 14 hours? Or do other states have it set up, because it's kind of the same process? We could look into that and see.
Yeah, I can't speak to that
Yeah.
immediately, what the variations
Just
are in
seems like a
election
long
day
day.
hours. But to come back to the first question here, as far as what information was viewed or accessed, we can't even tell for sure what they did with it, if they were pulling it out or if they were just viewing it, or...
That wasn't the question.
Right, okay.
Do we know what information was viewable?
I believe that they would have had, for at least some of those registrations, they would have been able to see the name, the address, and possibly the last four of the social. All of those people that were viewed or accessed were notified that they had been.
And how were they notified?
We worked in conjunction with the Attorney General's office, and we sent them all letters notifying them of the situation, and then worked with the Attorney General's office, their fraud prevention group there at the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, that's a statutory requirement to notify the individual people. And we were told by the state board that out of several million records in the state of Illinois, about 75,000 of them may have been viewed, likely viewed, and of those, 100 of them were in Lake County. And all of those individuals should have received direct notification.
Good question, Sharon, thanks.
Hi, I just have a follow-up to that. As a voter registered for a number of years, we used to do the whole social security number. We don't do that any longer, but have the computer systems been cleared of those whole numbers so that only the last four digits would be perfect?
Yes.
Thank you.
To answer your question shortly, yes.
Continuing on the database thing, does a voter database ever get scrubbed? Like if there's someone who's deceased or moved out of state, how's that determined? I mean, maybe we really are at 98% voter turnout, and I'm just being facetious with them, but you know, how, because in some, I forget where it was, it could have been New York with Trump, where he said he wanted to kick people off who hadn't voted in 4 election cycles or something.
There is some of that. They don't kick them off, but if they don't vote, that's correct. Yeah.
So, I mean, there are several processes that do help to keep the voter registration rolls clean. Okay, so one is called voter a purge, and basically everyone on the voter rolls will be sent a voter registration card. It's non-forwardable, so it gets returned if you don't live at that address. So the ones that come back to the county clerk's office, they go through a process to try and confirm, try to find this person where they're actually at. That's a method to clean it up. We get information from the vital records, I believe it is, for deceased voters. National change of address helps to clean up records. We're also working with, eventually the ERIC project will help be cleaning up information from when voters move multiple out of state or even within state. Automatic voter registration helps if you go into your driver's license facility and you are going to be automatically registered. That's going to keep it current and up to date as well. So there's several steps. I don't know if you want to elaborate on any of those, or
Actually, Todd, who's sitting back there, is the absolute expert on it, but at least twice a year we get through the NCOA, which is the National Change of Address, where the state board cross-references voter registration data with information from the post office, and we get those changes. We are now required by statute to update anybody's voter registration with this new address that we get. However, before we change it, we mail to each individual twice. We send them a letter advising them that we have gotten this information about a new, an updated address. And they have an opportunity to contact us and reject it and say, oh no, that was a mistake. It was only my son who was going to college and the post office read the change of address incorrectly. If we don't hear anything after that first letter, we then send them a voter information card. So that's yet a second attempt to let them know that we have changed their address. Most people find that very helpful. They'll say, oh, I moved, I forgot to update my registration, so it's very helpful. There are a few instances which, again, like a college student going off, and the post office interprets it as the entire family has moved. But again, we can correct those. And you can also, because we have Election Day registration, we can catch those on Election Day. We do get monthly reports, as was mentioned, through vital records of people who have been deceased in the jurisdiction. And again, and we cross-reference those. We really rely also on family members to contact us because we don't have an automatic, we don't get automatic information, for example, for a registered Lake County voter if they happen to die in another jurisdiction. It takes longer to get that information.
Great, thanks. And at some point in time, I would like to know if other counties have such a comprehensive approach to purging voters.
It's required by statute.
Yeah. Sometimes it's required, and sometimes there's not the staff to do it. Finding out.
It costs money too.
Yeah, and I think it's based on their budget. Okay, back to questions.
Okay, yeah. I have two questions for Carla on, number one, what safeguards do we have at all? She's holding it, so I don't want her to stand.
Okay.
What safeguards are in place so that if someone, I understand people can request a mail-in ballot online, and what safeguards are there in place to make sure that other folks aren't requesting ballots online for folks that, you know, they're pretending to be someone who's asking for a ballot, a mail-in ballot?
Okay, did you say you have two?
And I have two. We had Trevor Potter speak in Lake Forest, the league, and one of the things that he mentioned after the event was that it would be possible for a system to be hacked through an election judge, them using a personal computer in their interactions with the clerk's office or something like that. Are there any situations where there's a potential for the online resources of the clerk's office to be compromised as a result of volunteers?
Okay, the first one on when somebody requests a vote by mail ballot, we, as I mentioned earlier, we treat that just as if you were in the polling place. We have election judges in our office for more than 40 days before the election. When those applications come in, the election judges look at those. First of all, they cross-check to make sure they're registered, just as anybody would in a polling place. And then they also compare the signature. And if the signatures are not the same, if somebody else is trying to request a ballot for you, they're rejected. And they contact the voter. So you would find out that somebody had tried to request a ballot in your name and tried to forge your signature. And you would have the opportunity then to defend it. The second question was hacking into through personal. I think it's pretty unlikely. Our systems are so, for example, our voter registration database is so protected. The data is encrypted, it's password protected. We have firewalls. I think it's unlikely. Now, would I stake my life and say absolutely never? But we have all kinds of protections. We work with also the Lake County IT department to make sure, again, that our firewalls are protected, and we have all kinds of defenses against intrusion.
Okay, maybe one or two questions?
I have one question for our live stream.
We'll get you, Mayor.
Yeah. So this is Elliot Hartstein, and he says, what are your thoughts on open primaries or some variation? Some people vote in primaries but might not want to declare their party. So by that I think he means instead of having to take either Republican or Democratic ballot, you could have all the candidates on one ballot.
Carlos, it's my turn now. I'm opposed to it. For a simple reason, you know, clarify, even though it's in the bio, I am the chairman of the Lake County Democratic Party. I just think what happens, and to use an example, I'm running for office, I have nobody in the Democratic primary running against me. I'm just using an example. But my opponent, we put up a candidate against the Republican opponent, okay? So I have all the Democrats that I know take a Republican ballot to vote for the candidate that I want to face. And this happens in other states. And you know, the point is they say, well, people don't want to be known as a Democrat or a Republican. We've had this system for what, 100 years maybe or so? And you know what? The process is still in place. People still vote. People still get excited. You change numbers. And I think there's always been that apprehension that if I take a Democratic ballot and I work for a Republican, I'm going to get fired, or vice versa. I just think those are such rare times that it's unusual, but I think the vote total is still there. You can see it. If it's a great year for Democrats, they're going to have the largest amount of votes. If it's a great year for Republicans, they're going to have the largest amount of vote in a primary. So I think that I am adamantly opposed to it, and I want to keep it a close primary.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mayor Pierce, who had a question.
Well, I see, I note the concern with voters lists. Aren't voters lists freely available, or maybe there's a cost, to anyone with name, address, precinct lists, precinct registration lists? I see them out all over the place with ages, how they voted in previous primaries, name and address. Are they being obtained illegally? No.
And actually, Brent might want to follow up with this because it sort of is a segue into the commission and whether or not we've released data to the commission.
Can I just explain what he's saying now? So you're talking about people who are campaigning, right?
Yes.
Walk lists.
They're available, you don't have to go rushing to get them.
The statute limits it very specifically. You can only get lists of voters if you have a campaign on file with the state and you are using it only for political purposes. So it's limited, and again, that's a segue into the President's Commission, which has requested all this voter data.
They can be reproduced, so if they're still Xerox machines or any kind of machine.
You know, they can be. We can't control that, but we do have to allow candidates and campaign and parties to, participate in the political process. They sign an attestation that they're only going to use it for political purposes. So that's the only way they can be distributed. For example, if we get FOIA requests in our office all the time just for random people for lists of names and addresses of voters. And so we say, yes, we can respond to that, but we, by law, we can redact all of the personal information, which means we redact all the addresses and any other personal information. So there's a very fine distinction in the law about releasing that information.
Every precinct cabinet in Cook County, they're not elected, and every elected committeeman in Lake County seems to have a walk list by address and by alphabet of every precinct. And not only that, how they voted previously in the last 4 primaries and how old they are even.
And by law, they're entitled to that.
Is that law being broken?
No, by law, they are entitled to that as long as they're using it.
Why is it so shocking that some Russian may get if it's so available in this country? I'm missing.
Well, I think what this also points out is that political committees have a lot of latitude, whereas everyday citizens, if we requested this, let's say I wanted to run as an independent, I'm not sure this is a good comparison, but and I hadn't put a political committee together, I would not be able to have access to that information.
I don't
If
think
I
that
had
any
raised
candidate
5,000, so it cuts, unfortunately, both ways. Who
An
should be
independent
getting it
candidate-
and why is there discrimination? That kind of.
Can't an independent candidate get a list of all courts?
But
You have to be a part.
you have to have a political committee.
As
and
long as you have a
$5,000.
committee on file with the state, and you have to
$5,000.
file, if you've as soon as you raise $5,000, you have to have a committee on file with the state.
So
So
school board people don't raise 5,000, and they can't get the list because they don't raise 5,000. Some
Yeah, but
raise the
they-
school board.
Well, but they don't run as parties. In Illinois, all school board members run, as nonpartisan.
Well, the committees have a lot of power and they have a lot of access, whereas everyday citizens don't. And I think that's something I've been interested in a little bit. At our organization, we work with the State Board of Elections. If anybody has seen Illinois Sunshine, you'll see lots of data on every committee, every gubernatorial candidate. It just goes on. We actually partner with the State Board of Elections to get that, but we're only able to partner because I have a committee still. And that's why we'll keep that committee, because it is invaluable. We don't do anything with it, we aren't political with it, we just take the information and feed it into a database.
But here's another, to answer Dan's question in a lot of ways. We as a Democratic Party, for example, I have control of the vote builder. That's basically the list and everything of all that. I cannot give that list to any individual unless they're running on the Democratic ballot as a Democrat. So, or I can lose my right, and the Central Committee would lose its right to having that file. So, we're restricted to who we can give it to too, or we lose our right. That's like a lot of people come, well, so-and-so's running for school board, but they're really a Democrat. And I said, no, they can't have the list because they're not running as a Democrat. Republicans have the same rules and regulation, but the point is, you can lose the authority of having all that list. So you're not going to give it out to anybody.
Terry, your precinct committeemen who are elected in Lake County and every primary every 2 years, they can get a list of their precinct.
For their precinct only.
And they can reproduce it.
Well, like Carla said, we can't stop that kind of stuff.
But I think it's an interesting conversation on the data and how we have access to it and how certain people don't, and how it's used. I mean, it's voter information. So I'm going to move forward a little bit on that, but it's a really good question. We are taking that into consideration. So are there, yes?
I have a question on cross-check. I understand that Illinois was part of cross-check. Was information given out to the committee? And if it was, how specific was the information? Was it just the name? Or did they have, were they able to access more information on it?
As far as with Crosscheck, okay, so Crosscheck is the organization of roughly 30 states. I think a couple have pulled out of it recently, but in the neighborhood of 30 states are involved in this program. The State Board of Elections has been involved with it since 2010. And what it is basically a data sharing where voter registration data for Illinois is shared with this group, this Crosscheck group. It's based out of Kansas. So the information that you're speaking of that was released, are you referring to the emails that were FOIA'd?
Yeah, the
Okay.
Presidential Commission.
So, well, the Presidential Commission is different than Crosscheck.
Okay.
Okay, so Presidential Commission, the Kobach Election Integrity Commission.
That one.
Okay, so this is a different program. They have requested, back in June, they requested basically all of Illinois' voter registration data, including information that we don't even maintain in Illinois, like what party you register with. You don't register with a party in Illinois, etc. Okay, so they sent it to us, and they indicated that we're going to make this information public. We said no, because you can't make it public. They come back again and said, okay, we won't make it public. So we then follow up with a response to them, okay, well, here's the deal. You, in Illinois, per statute, you have to, only certain people can get this data. And that this is a follow-up to a discussion that's been going on here. But you have to either be a political committee, a registered political committee with the state, or another government agency doing official government business. And furthermore, we wanted an assurance from them that this information, not only that they weren't going to be releasing it, but that it wasn't subject to like a federal FOIA or a any law that would require that commission to disclose the information. So at this time, we've not gotten a response back from them on that. So at this time, we have not given it to them. We have been seeking additional documentation and assurances from them. I don't know where it will end up. It's going to end up with our board again, which is a 8-member board. They would have to take a vote on it to determine whether or not they're going to release it or not. So that's where it stands now.
We could go on forever. There's so many. Yes, you'll be our last question.
Can't the Trump committee, use because he's the one who's requesting for the information, can't his campaign committee, which is probably registered in every state, get this information?
They wouldn't be registered in every state because they register with the feds, basically, so it kind of supersedes our authority there. Now, as far as whether or not that campaign committee could do it,
right.
I don't know what the repercussions are if they get it and then give it away to someone else. I don't know what those repercussions are, so I would have to defer to our legal department for that answer.
Thank you, everybody, from our we've ever had at a forum, so thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming. We learned a lot. Go to our website. We will have this, everything that has been videotaped online. And just a couple things what we learned. We've learned that access to voting information shouldn't happen. We've got to make sure that it never does happen. And secondly, that how decentralized Illinois is, and some counties have so much money for training and purchasing new machines, other counties don't, and the training is also a big issue when it comes to poll workers who have to spend 14 hours, and we have to understand how other states handle that. Maybe there's a way we can make some inroads there. Plenty of other things too. You've been wonderful. Thank you.